Neela de Zoysa is a recipient of a 2022 Les Meerhoff Botanical Research Award. She has been teaching at the Native Plant Trust since 2011. A botanist trained in Sri Lanka, Neela is a proud product of the Sri Lankan universities, which have a great tradition in botanical research, where she trained under many eminent botanists. She also holds a master's from Oxford University. Having begun her career in the high biodiverse rainforests in Sri Lanka, she completed the taxonomic revision of the Sri Lankan palms at Harvard Herbaria, where she was a research associate of the Arnold Arboretum. Bringing wild ratans, I gotta stop and ask, am I pronouncing rattan? Okay. Or climbing palms into cultivation was one of her accomplishments, for which she received an Outstanding Young Scientist Award in 1988. She was naturally curious about the climbing plants here in the Northeast US. She is active with many local land conservation organizations in the Metro West. She received a River Steward Award in 2010 from the Suasco River Stewardship Council for her services to the Assabet River National Wildlife Refuge. Was recognized as the Volunteer of the Year by Sudbury Valley Trustees in 2022 and received a resolution of congratulations and recognition for her contribution to native plant conservation by the state of Massachusetts in 2022. She serves also on the Council of the New England Botanical Society since 2023. With no further ado,
okay, thank you, Matt. I feel like I was just here in this room teaching a class yesterday. So now I have a new audience, so it's lovely to see so many familiar faces and friends. Again, I'm very grateful to the New England Botanical Society for the Research Award, because just like this year's Research Award, I feel like I was plodding along by myself, just driven from curiosity since 2019, looking at the climbing plants. And I want to say Ted was my biggest support, because he said, I think you've really stumbled onto something. And so he's been really helpful in helping me with this project. So the Research Award was really helpful to consolidate or crystallize everything, because now I had some resources and could travel a bit, and I also had a deadline by which I had to produce a report, so that really helped me kind of get all the information together. So without much ado, I will, do I just move on from here with the cursor? Or do I have to find my...
No.
I have to get out of this and get into... Okay, thank you. So everyone at the back can hear me and see the writing here. So anyway, I'll just get to the facts without too much nicety. So this is the region I was looking at, based on the standard Gleason and Cronquist delineation of the Northeast. So it's supposed to be a little of a convenience also, because you've got these eastern temperate forests right coming all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, but there's a nice clean straight line here, so they had to kind of stop somewhere. Even though there are kind of cooler temperate forests up there, so there's 22 states which cover about 800,000 square miles. That's about 25% of the continental area of the US. So that's the area I was looking at, because when I first started looking at the New England climbers, it's still a political boundary, and it didn't really make sense. So I have to again thank Ted, who helped me kind of grow my list and figure out what tools to use to kind of go beyond. And most of the data is just at the state level, so that's also other than New England, nothing is regional, no information is regional, so everything is just in these little boxes of states, and that makes it hard to combine the data without some enormous computation, because there's a lot of repetition. And then if you think about it, the boundary goes from Minnesota up here on the west, so that's 80,000 square miles, and there's Rhode Island 1 square mile, or Delaware 2 square miles, so that's the range at which that state data is, so it's hard to make any meaningful comparisons unless you had all that information together. So New England actually is the only region for which that combined data is available. You have to make some sense of, of that data. So that's a region, and so I'll introduce you to my data quickly so that then we can look at all the plants. So what I did find out was that the climbing plants kind of cover about 33 families, 73 genera. There's about 204 species. I'm always adding some, removing some. And the interesting thing is that it kind of follows a regular division of most of the rest of the plants. So about 36% are native and 64% are non-native. And out of that, I just found it very interesting that about 75% of the native plants fall into a rare category. So at least one or more of the 22 states have 75% of those 204 climbers listed as rare. And then out of the non-natives, 42% are invasive. So I'm not going to go there because, that's that invasive group. I feel sometimes we talk about the invasive so much that we forget about our native climbers. So it's good to kind of focus on that circle where the rare and the native climbers are. So I'll kind of go backwards, and then I will define what I'm saying a climber is. But I thought I'll just introduce you to the data first, so we can kind of, I can kind of tell you that green section, and out of that green section, the yellow section is what I'm going to kind of focus on. And I'll talk a little bit about wide-ranging native vines too, which are not rare, and I'm hoping by the end of this talk you'll look at poison ivy with new eyes, or the Virginia creeper, all the things we walk right past with new eyes after this talk. So any questions for this before I move on from these numbers? So now I don't have a final number for the Northeast. I did talk to Rob Nazi, who's the editor-in-chief of the revision of the Gleason and Cronquist work, and he said that they have like a 5,300 round number on their website. So I asked him, can he give me something a little bit more specific, and he said no, it's still a work in progress. So I had no way to really compare that 204 climbing plants that I had identified against a bigger number. But so New England was the only place where I had like a total number, at least. Not that that's also going to change with those revisions, but at least there's a more precise number. So interestingly, I found that in the New England area, it's almost the opposite. It flips over. So we have more non-native climbers, 60% to 40% native, and the real culprit is Massachusetts. We have a lot of non-native climbers here, and I'm just speculating. I don't have very good analysis, but I think it's because we have places like the Arnold Arboretum or the Botanic Gardens. So there's been a lot of introductions, and also if you look at New York State or Pennsylvania, they also have a lot of botanic gardens, but those are vast areas. So then when you match those non-natives against the entire climber flora, they are not as much. So because Massachusetts is a little smaller, it turns out that, you know, it's like 64 to 36 the other way around. So it's interesting, and I also like this division of the woody and the herbaceous because it helps us figure out where those rare vines are, right? So you find that most of the rare climbers are in that herbaceous group. So that, and then, you know, quite a few of the non-native invasives are in the woody group. So those are all kind of, I found it very interesting to see those numbers. So this is a few seconds of my little journey to find these plants, because there's no way, no one place to find these plants, because traditionally we put the woody climbers, you know, get together with the trees and shrubs. If you go into botany, you can very quickly find your woody climbers, which are called lianas in botany, or you find the woody vines are, you know, just stuck in with the shrubs. So the Donald Stokes, I know Brian, you always say this is one of your favorite books, right? So this one's a great book, Sally and Hall Weeks. And then all the herbaceous climbers are together in the wildflower guides, because we don't really separate the climbers. So it was also kind of interesting when I tried to look for them. There's no one word with which you can search them. So I was looking at vine, liana, tendril, you know, all kinds of other words to try to kind of gather everything. So there's of course a big movement now to look at climbers as a group, and it was much more important in the tropics, because, you know, these were considered kind of pest species in forestry, so people were always trying to get rid of woody vines. And so recently, in the last 20 years or so, there's a big movement in the tropics to get to know those woody lianas better. And slowly, little by little, there's a movement here too to look at the temperate woody climbers. So this particular website is the one that I found most useful, the University of Michigan Climbers website, which gives a very nice collection of what's available in Michigan, and that kind of provided me with a bit of a structure to go ahead with this study. Then I came upon, I had seen this reference, but I hadn't taken it so seriously because it's so old, and until Liza Green stumbled upon it and you know, said, oh my goodness, look at this. And so then I took a look at it again, and it was an amazing book. It covers about 100 climbers from 1897. I do have a copy of it I will pass around. It's a first edition, so I have it in a plastic bag, but feel free to look at it. So this is, as far as I know, the earliest kind of field guide for the vines of Northeastern America, and it was quite influenced by Darwin's publication that had just come out before that, because Charles Newhall also has written 2 books on the trees and the shrubs. And I think that had Darwin not done his big treatise, he probably would have maybe combined the vines together with the shrubs like most other people were doing. But I think that given the number of quotes that he has of Darwin in this book, I think he was very influenced by it. So that gets me on to Darwin, and you know why I call this talk the climbing plants. I know here in the US we tend to call everything vines, and I'll get to that too. So the group of plants we are looking at, those 204 plants that I said I had kind of tracked down. You know, just basically a climbing plant is a plant that's not erect, but it's I guess much nicer to say a climbing plant. So there are stems that are rooted in the ground but not self-supporting, long flexible stems that climb and trail. So they're kind of mobile plants, right? So their roots could be in one place and their leaves in another place. And they have a range of climbing strategies and specialized structures to affix themselves to these supporting structures. So what really interested Darwin and people of that generation was because these particular plants resembled animals. So I mean, now this whole field has come back again because people are looking at plant behavior, just like they're looking at animal behavior. Just because it's slow and not at the speed that animals move doesn't mean that plants are not moving. And the tip of any green plant obviously has a circumnutation or a rotation, and in the case of the climbing plants, it's a lot more exaggerated. So I think Darwin has some wonderful quote where he says, you know, and of course he was sick a lot, so he would, when he couldn't do much else, he had this plant on his desk. And then he said something like it was fascinating to watch the tip making this grand sweep, this big circle on a hot summer day, watching it until it, you know, found something to latch onto, and then it just went into action. So anyway, so I want to tell you about 3 points about these plants that will, you know, are so characteristic. So first is that climbing is actually a kind of parasitism. So we don't think about it that way because we are used to thinking about plants that don't have green coloring or not, you know, or not autotrophic, not making its own food as parasitic, but these are actually structural or mechanical parasites because they need a structure on which to climb up. And so it's a very successful innovation in the plant world because you're not investing in the woody tissue, and instead you're using other plants or something else for support. So it can be traced back to the climbing ferns in the Carboniferous period. So I know some of you went for the walk, we saw that climbing fern. So here's a picture of you know, of a fossilized fern that's been reconstructed. It's called, I don't know if I can pronounce it, Symptomariopteris busqueti. So you can see it's a climbing fern on a tree fern when the world was all populated by ferns. So this is obviously very successful because this has arisen independently multiple times among many plant families. And right now about 25%, that's about 170 seed plant families, have at least one climbing species. And so in total about 25,000 climbing species in the plant world. And so we have one remaining fern family. I call it a true climbing fern family, and that's the Lygodium that some of you saw in the garden a couple of hours ago. So it's called Lygodium palmatum. It's the one climbing fern we have here in North America. And I'd say it's the only true climbing fern family. There are a few other fern groups that, I don't know, they kind of have rhizomes, or they do a little running and crawling and, you know, reproduce themselves, but you don't have any true climbers like this group of species. Does this work? So these are the pineals, and I have this little, you know, little diagram here to show. So that's a rhizome. So if you think about it, a fern frond, the climbing part is actually the rachis of the leaf. So it's actually not very efficient. If you think about it, every single leaf is climbing separately. It can't really climb too high. And these are the fertile pineals. It's very beautiful when you see them. It's too early in the year, but you know, they start kind of becoming these very tiny, lacy parts of the leaf. That's the part that carries the spores. And if I know many of you will recognize this, if anyone recognized the little symbol for the natural heritage and endangered species program for Massachusetts, they have the little climbing fern here. And so it's also interesting, did anyone know that this is our first officially conserved plant in the US? So in 1869, the Connecticut legislature actually protected this plant because it was so over-collected for Christmas decorations, because it stays evergreen. So this was used a lot to decorate fences and mantelpieces. during the Christmas season, and I don't remember who told me, but they would have like little street stalls and had large amounts of this climbing fern, so of course it was over-harvested and never really returned. So I'll also, as I go along, I'll have a bunch of these maps that I've gotten from the Q Plants of the World online, and that's that little region I'm studying. So the red lines are kind of, just to give you a sense of what's above that line. So you can see that, fern goes all the way down to the Florida Panhandle, all the way down to the south. Okay, so second point I wanted to mention was, something obvious, but maybe we don't always think about it. So if you want to do this kind of twisting and turning of a climbing plant, you've got to have a certain kind of stem structure. So this one here is just a comparison. I have, just a standard textbook, Encyclopedia Britannica, cross-section of a woody stem. And here's, just a sample of a tropical family, Malpighiaceae, arrangement, like a, transverse section of the stem. So you can see they have a lot of soft tissue, lots of cambial layers, all different shapes to help that plant have that flexibility. So interesting arrangements. And then here's a herbaceous plant again, monocot and a dicot. I think Nancy was also helping me kind of interpret these cross sections, so you can see the vessels, the xylem are very large. So the climbers have both these because it needs to get the water up fast because of all that foliage up there, and so the vessels are kind of built partly to get the fluid up fast and also to be able to be flexible. So of course it comes at a little bit of a cost. And this is a cost, is that when you don't have wood and insulation, you can't handle the cold. So as you go up north, climbers disappear. So if you're in the boreal forests where the winters are long, then you don't have any climbers at all. So if you look down here, you have a lot of woody climbers. So the numbers I've got is that it's about 15% of the flora. If you're down in Panama and below, there's a great Smithsonian climbers project. So in the Northeast area, at least from the numbers I have, it's about 3.7%. Climbers are about 3.7% of the flora, and then in New England it's about 2.4%. And this also moves where down here you have 80% woody climbers, 20% herbaceous. As you go up there, you get 80% herbaceous, 20% woody, and then only herbaceous, and then all climbers disappear. And then I was also able to see from my data, I don't know how valid that analysis is. Like I said, if Minnesota is 80,000 square miles and Delaware is 2 square miles, it's hard to make a valid comparison. But I could also see that there's more woody species in the coast, and as we get into the plains, then you start to get lots of small herbaceous species. So it was very interesting to see this trend in the climbers. So that's the effect of that, the lack of wood, that it also takes away the insulation. So as so they are great in the tropics, but as it gets colder, climbing is not a very efficient way to live. Okay, so next is all the different mechanisms. So one is, of course, the main stem twining. Again, efficient up to a point. I think about it, it's a lot of energy to move your entire body the whole time. Takes a lot of energy. And climbers are also mostly, they twine to the right. You get a few that twine to the left. This is a buckwheat, Falopia. Yeah, Palopia, and so most, I think I have here twining stems. We have about 50% of our climbers have twining stems. And then the next mechanism is tendrils. So tendrils are, again, much more efficient because you don't have to move your whole stem around, which takes a lot of energy. It's easier to have other appendages that latch onto things. So you can have the grape family, Vitaceae has repeated forking stems, and the Virginia creeper we saw, they have tendrils, or the cat's claw vine, and they have those little sticky pads at the end, like little Velcro. Then the bean family also has forked tendrils, cucumber family, and then the smilax or the greenbrier family. All different parts of the plant have become tendrils. Then less common, so I call them active mechanisms because these are actively climbing. They use these mechanisms to actively climb. Then you have less common mechanisms like the Adlumia, which has their leaf tips and kind of curve around. Then clematis, clematis has its leaf petiole, and then poison ivy, and a couple of other root climbers we saw have their aerial roots, are the ones that attach. So these are a small percentage, about 3%. And again, I think I pointed out when we were walking outside, root climbers are much more of a tropical phenomenon because these little aerial roots desiccate, they dry out if the air is not moist. So that's why I think poison ivy is a kind of hero because it seems to be very successful and have adapted to the cold here. And then there are passive mechanisms. So there's prickles and spines and barbs. So these are ways by which plants kind of latch on and just stop themselves from slipping down, so they're not actually actively climbing. So you get a lot of shrubby climbers, or actually I think they're climbing shrubs, so you think about it that way. Rose family, catbrier family, then little barbs like in the red straws and smartweeds. Some have combinations. So, for instance, the smilax, they will have spines as well as tendrils. Things like the hop spine will actually twine as well as have barbs. So, lots of interesting combinations. So, anyway, just to add to what. Talking about barbs, I thought it would be a good point to give you a biographical note about my working on rattan. So these are climbing palms in the rainforest where I used to work. So you can see those long, what you call a cirrus. And so that's what they look like. They're really nasty. And this is what the stem looks like. And so those long cirrus kind of whip-like structures, they just kind of latch on to things as they climb up. So that's me. Just, so these are like 40, 50 feet long. So when you're doing herbarium specimens, you actually have to cut them into multiple pieces, these long palm fronds into multiple pieces, and then label them in order so that someone can reconstruct the leaf. So it's probably, I was 28 years old, in flip-flops. So for those of you who might not know where Sri Lanka is, that's where it is. Large island, 3 times the size of Massachusetts. So anyway, this is just I'm trying to make humorous a very frustrating part of studying the climbing plants, and I've seen papers written about this topic of people pleading for standardizing of common names because we have so many different names. So just like it was hard to find them in these different places. So if you go into Go Botany, woody climbers are lianas and herbaceous climbers are vines. So that's the standard definition. So here in the US, I find people call all climbers vines. So they think lianas are in the tropics, there's all Tarzan and that whole stuff. And in Europe and in Britain, a vine always refers to a grapevine for good reason. Vine, the word vine or vino comes from the grapevine, or plants with tendrils. So anything in that grapevine family tends to be called vines. And other types of woody climbers are called creepers. So if I try to tell my Sri Lankan family or friends that I'm studying climbers, they say, oh, you mean creepers. So that's, and I think that's where the word Virginia creeper comes from, because I think when early settlers came here, they were using the British terms. Then of course brambles are mostly rose family plants, blackberries, raspberries, then briars are smilax, like, you know, bro rabbit and the briar patch. And we use these words a lot. Then clingers are root climbers, so scramblers, candle plants, twiners. Anyway, the list just goes on and on. So when you're reading up some of these things, I like to say, just beware of all the different terminology. I think I saw there was a wonderful, huge study. They had gone through some 8,000 documents of trying to collate all the climbing plants of Eurasia. And the scientists who did that said, common names are chaos. Like it's impossible to find them. All right, so I didn't have time to put this into a nice chart, but so I try to kind of make these categories from all the different things that I observed. So I kind of felt like there's these woody high climbers that kind of climb anything more than 25 feet high. Then you have some that are kind of medium level, and then shrubby climbers. So I found it also interesting that these shrubby climbers, because we have a lot of shrubs, and as you saw, New England has only 2.4% climbers, so it's a very small percentage of the flora. No wonder we are not particularly focusing on it. So then in the herbaceous group, these are the two big groups, because so again, these twining climbers, the interesting thing is, if you think about it, if you're trying to twine around a large support, there's only so much of a circumference that plant can twine. So that's why twiners like to grow on the edges where there are more secondary vegetation, because trees and supports with smaller circumference is easier for them to twine around. So if you have a very large tree, you can't really get your stem around that. So for that reason, herbaceous climbers or twiners also, they can't really carry themselves that high. They can only go up to about a certain point. I don't know, would everyone agree with me? I'm hoping during this talk that most of you will also give me some feedback to my work in progress here. So then you have herbaceous low climbers that we don't even like to call climbers, so many times I know we call them vine-like plants, the vichias and the little plants. And then I kind of had to separate the dudders, the parasitic, even though they're in the morning glory family, because they're parasitic, they're so different that you couldn't really put them with the rest of it. So that was kind of my practical separation of these groups. So, okay, so you ready for the lots of plant pictures?
Always.
So I'll start with, the cucumber family, Cucurbitaceae, and I will also, so I'll just go through a few groups of plants. I have a long list here, so I might skip a few. And please feel free to interrupt and ask the question. And for each one, I have a little map of the plants of the world online. From Q, the green area is where it's native, obviously, and wherever a plant is very well established, naturalized in other parts of the world, I also like to include it, because you can kind of see it spread. Sometimes plants are also invasive in other parts of the world. So the cucumber family obviously is a, you know, all vine, all climber family, and I found the wild cucumber interesting because Echinocystis lobata is actually a monospecific genus. It's the only species in this genus, and it's only found in North America. So because it's a large continent, I think, you know, I come from an island, so I'm used to thinking of endemics and restricted plants, but I found it also interesting. There are lots of plants restricted to this part of the country, but we don't necessarily think of it that way because it's a large area. And so these are also interesting, these cucumbers, because they are herbaceous and they're annuals. And I always love seeing the wild cucumber. That picture is kind of, you know, what I wanted it to be. It's like sometime in late October, you never know where you'll see this huge halo at a distance, and you know it's a wild cucumber because it leaves out late, because it's an annual, and then it flowers in late October, and then it's filled with fruits. And it also has these, you know, obviously it's, the Latin name refers to this hedgehog-like fruit. And I love these seeds. They look like little beetles or something, these beautiful variegated seeds. And then there's also Sisius angulatus, the one-seeded bird cucumber, another species we have. In that case, you have a whole lot of fruits all in one little cluster. Also, you know, very widely distributed. And going further south, the Guadalupe cucumber, Melothria pendula, which is rare in some of the states. And then California quinquiloba, which is just found in Missouri, in the area that I was looking at, but because it's much further south. So this kind of gives you a little window into how I'm going to look at these plants, you know, kind of go from north to south, or from widely spread to very restricted. And this is also rare. And so I have a little story to tell, which maybe some of you have already heard, to continue that story about Darwin and his book about climbing plants. I think maybe some of you might have heard that it all started with him reading a short paper that Asa Gray had written about the coiling of tendrils of this Sisius bird cucumber. And he was very interested, and so Asa Gray sent him seeds of both Echinocystis and Sisius, and he warned him and said, well, these plants are kind of aggressive. I think he called them rather troublesome. So just be careful, or something, he said. And so when Darwin tried to germinate it, these seeds never germinated. But it was the Echinocystis seeds that did germinate. So those were the ones that he started watching the tendrils, and he got so fascinated that he ended up studying almost 100 different species of climbers, and that's what he collated into that 1875 book called The Movement and Habits of Climbing Plants. So it all started with this wild cucumber right from here. So moving on to one of our largest climber families with a big range. So I'll just show you a couple of widely spread species just so we have some reference. So I thought many of us know Apios americana, the groundnut. And you can see, you know, those beautiful inflorescences, and then they produce these tubers that are edible, currently used by Native Americans for food. It's high in protein, and then along with it comes our most threatened climber in this region that I could document was the Price's groundnut, or the Traveler's Delight, Apios priceana. It is the only federally threatened climber, so you can see it's extremely restricted in Missouri and Kentucky, and a couple of, I think it, no, it's in Indiana, so it's already extirpated in Indiana. And the interesting thing is that unlike with the Apios americana, the Apios priceana has single large tubers. Has anyone seen them?
I have.
Okay. Where did you see them?
Yeah, they're in Tennessee as well.
Yeah.
And I had a student that went out searching for new locations, and he found several.
Yeah, they were just found in how many? Just like 10 or 15 locations right now, right?
Yeah, very few, very few. Yeah.
So yeah, and we went down to Ted, Liza, and I went down to Mount Cuba Center where they have a wonderful collection, and so they did have this Apios priceana down there. So travelers delight not because of the beautiful flower, but I think maybe because of the tuber, which is very tasty to eat.
There are many edible plants that produce potatoes and beans together.
Yeah, this is also called the potato vine, right?
We called it Price's potato bean.
Yeah, potato bean, okay, potato bean, yeah. So, so from a kind of a, longish herbaceous vine, I'm moving to a very small annual. That's the Amphicarpa bracteata, the American hog peanut. You can see again, very wide distribution in all of the east. And this one has these cleistogamous flowers that never open. So these are the regular flowers. These are the flowers that don't open, that self-fertilize, and they end up making these little peanut-like large seeds which are edible. And then lots of different genera. So the bean family, the Fabaceae, has a lot of, is the largest family of climbers here in the Northeast. So Phaseolus polystachius, the wild bean, then the annual woolly bean, Strophostylis helvola, all of these being used by Native Americans, and I think in some of their sites where you can find in artifacts and bean seeds and signs of some of these edible plants that they have used in their food. So this is extirpated in some states, including, I'd say, Rhode Island or Connecticut. I don't remember the details. So now moving on to the really small climbers, so you can see again that cold, that whole trajectory, that gradation I said that happens with the cold. So you can see when these herbaceous tiny climbers, I think they're kind of miniature climbers. We tend to be very anthropocentric when we define these plants. If they're very tiny, then we don't really take it too seriously. But if you get down to that level, it's like a mini forest. But you can see it goes all the way up to the north. So Lathyrus japonicus, beach vetchling, so many of them, these are rare in 7, 8 of the states that I looked at. Marsh vetchling, Lathyrus palustris, again, you can look at that distribution, and in this case, the climbing appendage is right at the tip of the leaf. So it's the tip of the leaf that forms that tendril. Vichias, Carolina vetch, Vichia americana. So this one, it's right across the continent. And so the one woody, the only woody Fabaceae climber is the Wisteria frurescens. And so some of these climbers, I also found that Asian disjunct, I think Ted did a talk about that whole process also. So many times you don't get these genera in Europe, but you'll get them here in the Americas, North America, and then you'll get them in East Asia. So there are 3 Wisteria species, 2 which we already know as ornamentals, right, which we grow, and then just 1 Wisteria here. So this is our only woody Wisteria, very small cone-like inflorescence. I think they're very beautiful, just very triangular, short, compact inflorescences. The American wisteria. Okay, so I'm done with the bean family. So I'll just go through a couple of other quick things. So in the poppy family, we have just this one herbaceous climber, Adlumia fungosa, and again, this is also one of those genera. There's one Adlumia in China, Adlumia asiatica, I think so, yeah, and one Adlumia here. So this kind of tends to grow in shady, cool places in little forest gaps, so often we don't really notice it. And then, so that family has only that one climber. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the only climber for the entire poppy family. Anywhere in the world is this genus Adlumia. So the clematis is another big genus with one single species. So we went through that Fabaceae family with a lot of climbers, lots of genera, but clematis has one genus but lots of species. So this is our Virginia bower, the very wide-ranging climber. Then we have the Clematis occidentalis that Julie pointed us before. Those beautiful, delicate blue 4 petals, and that kind of mauve hazed seed head with this long flagella. And also has 2 subspecies, western and eastern. So this is rare right across the country. So I just have these few maps because I don't want to show lots and lots of. So we have lots of different clematis species, and you can see this Clematis addisonii, which is just found in Virginia only. So these are more northerns, right across the country. Then others are more southern. So I'll show you a couple of pictures. So these are some pictures that Liza took when we were down at Mount Cuba. So the group we call leather flowers, just kind of pointing down, those little lantern-like flowers. So Viorna pitcheri, Clematis crispr, and then that's that Clematis addisonii. So Mount Cuba has a fabulous collection of Clematis species. Oh, I had to show the passiflora, right? So these are the little treats of looking at climbers that go further south. So those passiflora is, again, huge genus, huge family with lots of genera. I think there's like 600 species of passiflora. I don't remember, but this is Passiflora incarnata, the purple fashion vine. I found it interesting that it's naturalized in my part of the world. And then this is a Passiflora lutea, the yellow fashion vine. And then another quick family I wanted to show, so coming on to Apocynaceae. Again, so you have, say, families like the Fabaceae with lots of genera and lots of species in each. And then you have other families like this Apocynaceae, lots of genera but very few species or single species. So this is called Gonologus suberosus, angel pod, so we have only one species of this. Thyrsanthella deformis, a climbing dogbed. This is a monospecific genus, so there's only one species in this genus, and that genus is here. In fact, all these, and leaves are also very variable, so you can see those leaves are very broad, these are very narrow. I know of similar Apocynaceae species in Sri Lanka, actually. And then this one is called Odontostephana. This is also an endemic genus, only found. This genus is only in that part of North America. They used to be called Matalia, but they've been moved out and created into a new genus. And then this is a Cynancum, like a swallowwort, but a native one. climbing milkweed. Does anybody know that species?
I think it was in morning glory flowers.
Oh, I see. So yeah, I won't dwell on this because, you know, the morning glory family is also big, like the Cucurbitaceae, a big, you know, vine family, so it's got lots of species, but I'm just showing you the wild sweet potato morning glory, Icomia pendurata. And then, of course, that family is large also because of all the cuscutas, the parasitic dodder vines. So I've just got one picture here, but, you know, lots of different, and quite a few of them are rare, and I know recently cuscuta was revised, so there's lots of changes of names, and they've been listed newly. So I'm watching the time, and I'm just going to go through a couple of quick woody vine groups. Now we finished with the herbaceous ones. It was hard for me to decide which one. So of course the grape family is another big one. So there's Vitis labrusca, Riparia, summer grape, and again I've got a whole bunch of maps, lots of different Vitis species. Some of course cultivated elsewhere, naturalized, and I think North America is a big center of diversity for the Vitis genus. Then there's other genera, Parthenocissus, the Virginia creeper, Nectaris arborea, the pepper vine, with compound leaves, then Ampelopsis cordata, native Ampelopsis heartleaf pepper vine. And I'm moving on to Toxicodendron, the poison ivy. There's only, so Toxicodendron is an interesting genus where there's only 2 climbers in this genus, and one is in Asia, in Japan and China. It's called Toxicodendron orientale, and then the other one is over here, and I think recently it made the Guinness Book of Records somewhere in Canada. There was a poison ivy somebody found which was 83 feet tall. And so I just want to point out, you know, both with the wild cucumber and things like poison ivy, I think when these climbers are very rambunctious, and of course we are also creating the environment for them by forest fragmentation, with the warming climate, they tend to be very, they thrive. So there's this feeling that because we are all into invasive vines, that we start to think our native vines are invasive. But they're really important for the wildlife. And I think it's important to kind of remember that, to leave it alone if you don't need to get rid of it. You know, they're important for the pollinators and the migratory birds. Okay, so we saw that Hydrangea barbara outside, the climbing hydrangea, the woodbat. So that's another wood climber. And this is what it looks like in flower, if Uli can get it enough sun. Maybe we'll see flowers soon. We saw this Campsis radicans, the trumpet vine, and then that's the Bignonia capriolata that you guys looked at. So, you know, if it was growing well and flowering, that's what it would look like, and it's also called a cross vine because its cross section has these very distinct markings. So I'm going to skip a few things. Maybe I'll skip I wanted to get to I want to get to the Menispermaceae because it's 8 o'clock. So this is another interesting family, Menispermaceae, which again is very, very, has a lot of generic diversity and just maybe one species in a lot of them. So the cup seed, which is just a monospecific genus, and again, because of the seed is cup-like, and Menispermum canadens, the Canada moon seed. Has these beautiful carved kind of half crescent kind of seeds. Fruits that looks like grapes but very poisonous, so one has to be aware that you have to be able to distinguish them. Nephroia carolinus, the Carolina coral bead, they used to be called cocculus maybe, now it's named as Nephroia. And you can see how tiny those seeds are.
Look like snails.
Berchemias. So this is moving on to a few other very southern vines, which is always kind of more exotic, Alabama. Supplejack, I even love the names, rattan vine. And this one I put especially for Jessa. Gelsemium sempervirens, the Carolina jessamine. And then this one is the American star vine, Schisandra glabra, also very rare, and they're trying to kind of revive it. I think Emory University is doing a lot of research on this particular vine, but it used to be common, but not anymore. So thank you all. I wanted to say thank you to, I call my dream team. Ted and Liza has been taking all these photographs and helping me with it. And this young woman from Sri Lanka dealing with promising, who's been very interested, so she's been helping me with my unreadable spreadsheets. And lots of other people and websites and resources that have helped me along. So thank you. Another talk to show you those slides I skipped over. So does anyone have any questions?
Got one back here.
Did you ever investigate precisely how tendrils, like the mechanism of how they twine?
So, I mean, in this talk, in this topic that I've been looking at, I've been looking mostly at the floristics and the distribution, because not many people, nobody's really looked at it, but there's a huge amount of work going on in the mechanics of climbing. There's a huge literature. So obviously when they twine, the cells on one side of the stem have to grow faster than the other side to make that curve. And a lot of these climbing mechanisms are being used in various biotechnology and other things, because there's, what's the thing that kids play with, slinkies, and those kinds of how tendrils work, and so there's a lot of biomechanics involved that's just, I find really fascinating. And so that, and there's a whole field of even something like poison ivy or Virginia creeper, which is what they call scototropic. That means they move towards the dark, because they know that's how they can find support. So instead of normal plants going towards the light, these plants move towards the dark, because they know that means they're finding a rock or some support. So they're almost saying so there's a certain way that plants are also make decisions. So there's almost intentional, maybe not animal-like in terms of we have a central processing organ. But plants have a lot of ways by which they also seem to do all those movements, including carnivorous plants. They're saying something like the Venus flytrap, for instance. That whole chemical process is probably the most primitive or the most basic form of memory, because something has to walk over it more than once. There has to be more than one stimulation for the Venus flytrap to close, and for that there's a chemical memory involved. And so there's a lot of interesting thing about plant movement. But I think the important point for us is that twining can only be done in certain circumferences. So some of those woody climbers, either they grow along with a tree, or they do what they call laddering. So it will twine on itself and then jump onto a branch. So they're almost so interesting. But I'll be happy to send you some links if you're interested.
Was it a challenge to decide whether certain species are climbers or non-climbers?
Yes.
Could you comment on that and talk about a few of the species that are kind of near that borderline?
So in some general, like let's say Calistegia, Spithemia, the very rare plant. So it will stay short just like the clematis that Uli was showing out in the garden. So they'll have a time, the tip will be almost like vining, but it won't really grow beyond that because whatever habitat it's growing in, it doesn't really climb, but it's clearly adapted back into a more herbaceous form. So sometimes, and then there are other plants like bladderwort species, not in this country, where the inflorescence climbs because it needs to come out of above the level of the water. So do we call that a climber? So when they say 170 families, they say plus or minus that one lentiviris, some people. So if you take something like a wild honeysuckle, the Lonicera dioica, it's climbing here in Massachusetts, but there's a very northern range. So when it goes all the way up to the northern Minnesota, it doesn't climb, it's like a shrub. Then other plants, so how do you decide? Or many of these woody climbers like poison ivy or bittersweet, they have a shrub stage. They have these leader shoots that look for something to climb, and if it can't climb, if it doesn't have something to climb, it's able to stay as a shrub. So then do you call it a climber? So they're very versatile plants.
And how did you draw the lines?
So if there's some stage that climbs,
Any stage.
or the literature defines it as a climber, then I would.
Would you consider something like Rubus hispidus a climber, or does that just?
I didn't really go there because you're right. There's a lot of little nuances. So those are, again, I categorize them as trailers. They would fall into the climber group of plants that are not erect.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they don't have roots. They're not things that have lots of roots. But then poison ivy has roots, but it climbs, right? So again, so that I think what it speaks to is that evolutionarily, the climbing habit has come up independently so many times because it's very advantageous that you get all these complexities.
One more question. I know you said you didn't want to talk about invasive plants or invasive plant. However, what do you think the horticultural industry, what role do they play in the introduction of these plants? Or if you have a sense of how many of them were introduced to gardens versus things that came, as seed in ballast or something from last year, accidentally.
Yeah, I mean, that's the elephant in the room, meaning that, with climate change and the fragmentation of forests, so we are creating that edge habitat that is perfect for climbing plants, right? So they are thriving. And so even though when I came to these climbers, they seemed like an indulgence. Are these going to be in Massachusetts in 50 years' time, right? I mean, is it going to be long enough for us to have all these plants? So it's interesting to see that even our native climbers would be moving up. And then I think with this particular situation, climbing plants can be an advantage, right? So if you're in an urban setting and you want something to fix carbon quickly and you want some shade, some cooling, I know that there are some statistics for some things like Boston ivy, that if you have a building covered with this kind of climber, you need 50% less air conditioning etc. So so you can use the climbers to our advantage. And then there's also a lot of new fields of what they call novel ecosystems. That means, we can't get rid of invasive plants, they're here to stay. They are providing habitat and food for animals and pollinators, so then, do we look at it positively and try to kind of accept it and find some balance? But otherwise, I don't know how else. I guess to educate about our native plants is one way to combat people bringing more unfamiliar plants. Because what was brought 100, 150 years ago, now we can't do much about it, but we want to bring more. And for many of these plants that I talked about, and I'm sure lots of other plants here, you have this Asian disjunct, right? So you have one species of Celestris here, bittersweet, you have 24 species of Celestris in China. Because so then there's that propensity when you bring something, they thrive here and they hybridize. So I don't have an answer. Maybe you have an answer.
I think it's more of a desire for what's different from here. That's driven the need to always bring in something new and quote unquote discover plants from other parts of the world.
Slow process. And I was going to ask all of you also, is there anything you find interesting that I could look into, because this is still a work in progress. I think I'm seeing the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, because I've got all these subdivisions in my, I've got a big spreadsheet with 200 species and 22 states and herbaceous and woody and invasive and rare and tendrils, or I don't know, all different things. It's like it's become this enormous thing. But is there anything that you might find interesting? There, Diana.
Your talk reminded me of all STEM modifications. And I was thinking when you showed that woody to herbaceous transition, I wonder if it would be interesting also to look at the frequency of rhizomatous species, and things that could be protected by the snow, in the wintertime. I wonder if you could see some similar patterns with other modified stems.
It would be interesting to.
Just
I'll
as
have
to
to-
some of the viney species, like that Papaver ACE1, when you see it, you're like, is that a vine or is it stoloniferous? Or, you're kind of like, it's scandent, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing is like you using the word scandent, they're rambling, scrambling, they have all different. So they're essentially non-erect plants.
Yeah, and so some, like,
Yeah, so
not
they're
fortified,
like, I
not
call them kind
fibrous.
of mobile plants. Their roots are in one place and so they have that mobility that maybe other plants that have made that trade-off by having lots of insulation in its wood doesn't give that same flexibility. Brian has-
You were just asking Neela about things to look at. It struck me as you were kind of saying this. It might be really interesting to look at some of the common species. Poison ivy would be a really interesting one. To look at the rate at which it may be moving northward. Just now from going to Maine, it seems like poison ivy is becoming more common, along the coast of down East Maine than it was 30 years ago.
I know it's in Canada, so that Guinness Book of Records plant is from Ontario. So it's up there and it's going 60, 70 feet. So it's warm enough clearly.
We have some refreshments if we want to keep talking.
Yeah, please,
We can
I think